Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm pleased to present yet another installment in my series of Community Spotlight videos, in which I interview various prominent and upstanding members of our Conquest LCG community. Specifically, we discuss their favorite decks, and how best to pilot their favorite warlords. Hopefully, through sharing their personal experience, opinions, and expertise, they'll be able to provide you with a host of information useful to both new and veteran players alike. Be sure to let me know what you think of this interview in the comments below, and as always, I remain ever open to constructive criticism. But with our introduction aside, let's get things started with a discussion of Old Zogwort. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before you and I delve into a deep discussion of the intricacies of Orkoid nomenclature, where might our viewership know you from, and how are you involved in our Conquest community?
My name's Jeremy Goniea. Probably better known to the Conquest community by my online username Blackliner. I'm fairly active on Octagon, and I had a chance to play at the regionals at Atomic Empire in Durham. Did fairly well there. I took Old Zogwort and finally lost in the semifinals to an excellent Kith player. Went 5-1 in the Swiss there.
Well, awesome. I guess, how long have you been involved in Conquest? How long have you been playing, and kind of what's the story behind your getting started in the first place?
I picked the game up. I became interested in it looking at the previews on Fantasy Flight's website just after release, I think. It was just core set at the time. The first War Pack hadn't came out. And I was just looking at it, and it looked like a very interesting type to two-player game. And that's something that I'm always on the lookout for. I play a lot of different board games and card games, and I had tried some previous Fantasy Flight games and not been that interested in them. But Conquest looked like it would hit the spot, and it did.
Sure. I guess, what had you tried before that didn't quite, strike your fancy?
I played the Lord of the Rings card game a good bit, and it was a little bit dry, and it didn't click for me. And I tried the Star Wars LCG they did as well, and I liked that game a lot. I only played it, someone had brought it to my local game store, and I played it against him a little bit. And I enjoyed the game, but I felt like the deck building options were so limited in it.
Sure, just having to pick pods is a little bit strange. It's almost like building a 10-card deck in a sense. And then in regard to the Lord of the Rings game, it's definitely a little bit of an odd experience playing up against a deck essentially piloted by like an artificial intelligence. Seeing as how that's a cooperative game, it's not competitive and adversarial. I suppose before we, really delve into the Warlords-specific discussion, is there any particular mechanic or spin on the traditional card game that Conquest introduces that just, really hits home with you, that you really find kind of resonating?
What I find the most enjoyable about Conquest is I feel like the overwhelming majority of games I play are decided by decisions the players make during the game. That
right.
Even though it's a card game and you're shuffling and you have these random decks, the outcome of the game is not very luck dependent. Most of the games I lose, I can identify things that I did that were not the best plays. And a lot of times when I win, it's because the opponent made a mistake at a critical moment. And most card games can't offer that. I played a lot of previous CCGs, and I feel like even at a very high level, like Magic the Gathering, for example, it's very popular. I would say at least 30% of games between players of similar skill levels are decided by who gets the better draw.
Sure. I mean, in Magic, you even see things like a mana screw, where all you draw is essentially resources, and then you don't have any decent cards to play with them. One of my personal favorite card games in the past was Summoner Wars. If you've ever played that, it's by Plaid Hat Games. And the way that that's structured is it has the same spatial, a similar spatial component to Conquest, where you're deploying units around a battlefield and moving their locations, but then that involves dice rolling. So it's just a lot of random numbers on top of random numbers. So I definitely can relate and empathize when I think Conquest is a fantastic game in that the outcome is indeed largely determined by player skill, but I suppose specific to this spotlight, I scoured the internet searching high and low for anyone to come out and represent the, if not maligned, underrepresented Orc faction, and specifically old Zogwarts, and you happen to step up to the plate and offer yourself up to represent our underloved Orc warlord here, but what is it to you that you find particularly appealing about old Zogwort?
The thing that stands out to me the most is one-on-one. If nobody plays any other cards, he will defeat any other warlord in the game.
Sure.
Now, granted, that's not the way any fight is going to go. At least I hope your opponent's not going to show up if they don't have anything they can do to influence the battle, knowing that they're going to lose. But he offers the unique ability to start out the game in a winning position.
Well, I suppose, what is it that really sets him apart from the other Orc options? So why not opt to play our core set Nosdrag?
I tried Nodrig a little bit. I strongly dislike him. I feel like all the negative things you will hear people say about the Orcs do apply to a certain extent, and that he has little ability to overcome them. He has no synergy with any of the Orc events for combat tricks, and he doesn't gain a lot of extra help by allying with either of the available options. A little bit more from Chaos because he can self-damage his units to pump Brutal, but even then he is a little bit overcosted and has very poor combat tricks, and I think Zogwart comes out a lot better on that.
Sure. Well, I suppose, seeing as how maybe if the Orc faction itself isn't fundamentally flawed or weak, as a lot of players, kind of assume it is or think it is, what are some of old Zogwart's greatest strengths?
The thing that sets Zogwart ahead of Nazdrag, at least for me, is that he has amazing synergy with the War Cry card. And because he brings a unit with him and makes a second one as soon as he attacks,
Right.
you've got 3 guys getting +2 attack right there, which is enough to completely devastate an opponent, especially one who's not the most alert and expecting it.
Definitely.
And if you choose to ally with the Astra Militarum, Suppressive Fire is also completely amazing with him. It's almost a free Indomitable.
Sure. Just in that you're exhausting those, readily expendable token units to exhaust enemies.
Yeah. You're trading a Snotling for your opponent's best unit for no resources expended. It's amazing.
Definitely seems like a hard value to beat there. Anything else really stand out as like a particularly compelling reason to give old Zogwart a try?
I think that he has a lot of resilience, and if you get his unique support out, which is not my favorite card in his available options, but you have to bring it anyway, opponents who are trying to kill your warlord will be faced with a lose-lose situation where every time they swing at him, they're making even more endless hordes of little orcs to gnaw at them.
Sure. And I mean, what's nice about that support is even though it might not be completely stellar, it's nevertheless, once your warlord is declared a defender, as opposed to actually having to take damage.
That's correct. So you can completely shield the damage or custom build generator and suffer no damage at all.
Sure. Well, I suppose, are there any specific matchups, like any other factions or warlords, where old Zogwart's strengths really shine and he kind of excels against?
Um, with my playstyle, at least, I haven't noticed any specific matchups based on the warlord. Um, I tend to use them as kind of like a lot of people use Kuyath, I think, as a almost like an extra elite unit
Okay.
because of how hard he can hit with the stream of tokens and try to uh, fight the long battle. Um, I tend to perform better against players who are intending assassination victories because they will commit to that long battle and realize too late just how many snotlings I've made.
Sure. I suppose just because they're not tremendously powerful in and of themselves, there's certainly a lot to be said about how many damage tokens they can do, through attrition and picking slowly away at enemy units. And, even if your opponent's hand happens to be full of 2 value shield cards, if they've got 3 1 damage attacks coming in, they feel, that added pressure each and every time to keep spending shield cards, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think I would say the Cortez, has a lot of trouble just because of the sheer number of units. He can't win the battle.
Right.
And then um, initially I feared Kato, but after playing against Space Marine a lot, Kato tends to get greedy and die trying to farm tokens.
Sure. I could definitely
I
see,
think with a more experienced player, that'd be less of a hazard. But most people I played against that are playing Kato made the mistake of trying to gain some extra resources and got their warlord bloodied very early in the game.
right.
But just Space Marines in general don't like Old Zogwart's playstyle because they rely, they're counting on Indomitable to stop the big hits, and you can't Indomitable force Notlings.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of the same problem that elites face, whereas something along the lines of an Ultramarines Dreadnought, whether it's attacking for 8 or 15, it doesn't matter if it only, is a 1/1 token that it's destroying. So if it kills 1 token and then 3 or 4 tokens attack it in turn, it's just like the Snotling attack dilemma, where you just overwhelm enemies through sheer numbers. I guess, granted, it's going to range tremendously how many snotlings you accumulate over the course of any given fight, but I suppose, how often is it that you get up near, like, the limit, maybe toward the end of the game in some drawn-out struggle?
I've never came close to the limit playing him. Um, it's unusual for me to get more than 4.
Okay.
But at the point where you have 4 Snotlings, if your opponent doesn't have some way to add an AoE unit to the battle, they've lost that battle.
Sure.
And if they had one, you've already killed it.
Well, I suppose, I can definitely see an opponent running into the dilemma where they have to weigh, do I want to keep expending attacks to try and bloody or force a retreat from old Zogwort, or do I want to try and, keep up the pace with destroying these tokens? How often is it that your warlord ends up bloodied?
It's a very common occurrence for me, especially against skilled opponents. A lot of times, as a calculated move, I will either allow the opponent to bloody him, or set it up where it looks like they can bloody him, but I'm holding out my 3 shield,
Sure.
and it puts them in a position where they expend a lot of resources and get nothing in return except me discarding that 1
Right.
card.
You kind of manage to fool them into overcommitting.
Any prolonged fight against Old Zogwart, who, if he isn't bloodied, will eventually turn against the opponent.
Well, I suppose, how exactly does your playstyle change if Zogwart does end up bloodied? Like, if it happens by mistake or you just allow that to occur, how does that alter your gameplay for the rest of the match?
Once he's bloody, I have to be very, very careful where he commits to. I actually lost my last game in the Octagon Warg because of a misplay at the last planet. My opponent was able to assassinate my Warlord. I had deliberately allowed him to become bloody, but I had the opportunity to retreat. If I had done so, I would have won the planet in the game. I just miscounted the amount of damage he could get by recurring troops with orbital
Sure. Well, I suppose just in a basic gameplay sense, like how do you go about, say, constructing a deck for Zogwort versus Nosdrag? Like, what are some of your staple inclusions?
Zogwort has at least three valid deck types he can build that are extremely different. It's one of the things that's I think is exciting about him.
Okay.
My favorite variant is allying with the Astra Militarum and going hyper aggressive, playing a very large number of one-cost units, pulling the Rattling Deadeyes in and the Talleyrand Raiders, and you've got shooter mobs, and it gives you a large number of units that have attack value that only cost one, and it lets you put units at every planet that can fight, and then use outposts to pump wherever your opponent's warlord goes and take a swing at them and just keep pressure on their warlord no matter where they try to hide.
Sure. I guess, is it typically the Imperial Guard that you pick as your allied faction, or do you ever experiment with Chaos?
I think Imperial Guard is the stronger choice. Like I said, there's at least three valid deck types, though. I can't remember his name. The guy that's running Zogwort in the Conquest Dome has a very orc-heavy build.
Okay.
I'm not sure who his ally is, if he even has any allied cards. But he tried. It's Astra Militarum because he's using hostile environment here. But he just tries to put so many hit points of orc units there that you can't outlast him. And he was able to defeat me playing Kato. And played a very good game there. And I like his build a lot. It's much less aggressive than mine. And the third build will be with Chaos. And using large amounts of direct damage from Daka 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 and Chorus and some of the Chaos spells, Warpstorm.
Sure. I suppose, for players just starting out, maybe with old Zogwart, since it seems so many of these warlords, once there starts to be sort of a growing public opinion that they're underpowered or just not competitive, people start to stray further and further away from playing them, or they give up trying them at all. What's just some basic advice you'd give to a player trying out Zogwart for the first time?
I would start out with the Astra Militarum build and play it. That's the most conventional deck of the three.
Okay.
And you play the deck a lot of the same ways you would play a Kith deck. You don't need to win command. You just need to make sure your opponent doesn't win.
Sure.
And you have so many cheap units, it's pretty easy to do that. And if they don't win command, then your warlord is stronger than theirs, and that's enough to crush them right there.
So you just kind of go for the stalemate approach. You're not winning cards and resources, but you're just kind of denying your opponent the opportunity to do so themselves.
Yeah, and with the very low cost curve of the deck, you don't need resources very badly unless you play a lot of battle cries.
Sure.
That's one of your more expensive cards. Battle cry is something that should be used to win an important battle and not played otherwise. A lot of times you can get extra mileage out of it by not playing it on the first round, and then your opponent won't retreat and will leave themselves in a hopeless position when you play at the beginning of the second round.
Sure. I mean, it's just kind of that same going back to trying to force an overcommitting from your opponent. Maybe in the second round they've let their guard down. I suppose, how do you get the most mileage out of your Snotlings tokens? Like, old Zogwart's signature squad is very much focused on getting those into play and doing things with them once you have them out. Do you make much use of his, like, signature army unit, or...?
In the build that I prefer with him, with the Astra Militarum, all of his signature cards are almost dead cards.
Okay.
I use the Run Herders as command units at 3 costs. That's not really a great bargain.
Right.
They're good against Anshe because he can't assassinate them with orbital cities. But other than that, they're not great at that role. And if you group 2 or 3 of them and bring them into a large battle, because you're using them as command units at planets you're going to fight at later,
Sure.
that can be extremely difficult for the opponent to handle, especially if you have a battle cry saved.
Right. Well, and it certainly seems like it would punish your opponent for trying to leverage, like, area effect against you.
Yeah, typically, when it comes to, there's always, in a well-matched game of Conquest, there comes a time when you have a big fight at some planet. And typically, with those Run Herders, what's going to happen is if you take an AoE 1 or an AoE 2, you're going to end up after that AoE with a stronger army than you had before it went off.
Right. Well, I suppose, what about just the event I mentioned by name earlier, Snotling Attack? Considering that old Zogwort forces those tokens to be destroyed, is that something that you skip, or do you ever use it?
I experimented with it very early when I was learning him, and I ended up taking it out. It's not worth the 2 resources. It does give you overwhelming ability to win a planet if your opponent doesn't bring any area of effect.
Right.
But it increases your vulnerability to area of effect, which normally is not really a problem for him. And it doesn't give you any command, and it's just, there's not enough room in the deck for it with the Astra Militarum build. The Chaos build I'm experimenting with, I think might have some space for it, but that's a very different build and play style, and I'm not sure I have it refined enough to know if I'm going to keep the card or not.
Sure. Well, I suppose, apart from what old Zogwort does well, if a player happens to be running up against him, I know our UK 2015 national championship winner, Varun, I think the first time he ever played against a Zogwort player was during that tournament. What are some of Zogwart's, weakest points? How is he vulnerable, and how can players attempt to play against him?
I think the key to playing against old Zogwort is beat him on command, and avoid committing to a prolonged battle. You want to be in a winning position when you get to the decisive battle so that he doesn't have a chance to prolong it.
Right.
The Swarm build that I have is fantastically vulnerable to Warp Storm, which is not a huge card in the meta, at least recently for me.
Sure.
So it hasn't been much of a problem, but I've had some just stunning amount of units killed by it before, and still been able to win the game because I just played more. But that is definitely a large weakness for it. Warp Storm, and I'd say to a lesser extent, maybe a skilled Eldar player with Doom.
Okay.
But because I spread units to all the planets, Doom is not going to give a good return a lot of the time.
Sure. Kind of the same thing with Exterminatus. It sounds like for the most part, they're not getting very much value out of that powerful event.
Yeah, they're likely to kill a Run Herder or shoot a mob in a Raider or something.
Right. Well, and just from listening to you talk, it definitely sounds like your opponent might want to err on the side of caution when it comes to retreating. And I suppose it goes without saying, for any of these warlords, really the more knowledge you have of what your opponent can do and when, based on how many resources they've got and all sorts of other factors.
I think
Or,
keeping an eye on the resources is key, and knowing when your opponent can battle cry.
right.
If they have already one or two orc units at a planet, and you want to fight there, and they've got 3 resources, you might want to fight somewhere else.
Right.
And I will say that as far as cards which Zogwort has trouble dealing with, Blood Angel Veterans, especially with a couple honored librarians behind it, is fantastically good against him.
Sure.
I think that's the card he has the most trouble dealing with, actually.
Sure. I mean, I could see that. I could see Steel Legion Chimera being a big issue, just because if you can't trigger that battle cry.
The Steel Legion is much less of an issue because it doesn't protect itself.
Right.
It does force you to kill it first, but the way I play the deck, it doesn't have a lot of first strike capability anyway. It relies on shielding or suppressing opponents that you can't afford to be hit by at full strength.
Right.
And then doing more damage in the long run rather than the short run, like, would be more typical for a deck.
Right. Well, and I suppose, you've mentioned a few different counters for Zogwort. You've mentioned some just basic strategy. I suppose, are there any particular command units that you're fond of? Or is it just those low-cost, incidental command icon units that you rely on for that breaking even?
Yeah, typically I don't have, like, favorite command units with him, I would say. It's just, if it costs 1, it probably has a place in the deck.
Okay.
The way the swarm build works. As more units are released, there'll be a little more choice there.
Sure.
I definitely see, particularly the neutral units, getting pressured out to allow him to have more combat presence. Because I'm not really trying to win and get the cards and resources from the Void Pirates. They're just another 1-for-1.
Right. Well, you happen to have mentioned Battle Cry earlier, but do you have any favorite kind of combos or tricks or any kind of synergistic card effects that you try to trigger when you can and take opportunistic advantage of?
I think the Weird Boy Maniacs can be a big help there. Just being able to take out key opponent units or use them like kind of like a very damaging Imperial Siege Fist and just kill a couple of low HP command units the opponent has in the same place. I was able to get great advantage against one of the Kith players I faced at Regionals by taking out 2 Chimera tokens and I think a Void Pirate at the same planet. That was a key of swinging that game in my favor. And sometimes you can also hit your own rat herders with them to make your army stronger, even though you're damaging them.
Sure. It definitely seems like it's a good card to prepare for an, impending onslaught during the combat phase.
The other, I think, moment I had that was an epic use of a card, 99% of the time, Daka 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 is a shielding deck. But at my store championship game, in the final round, I had mulliganed a bad hand and gotten, I think, 3 supports and a runt herder and a couple of events. And I'm looking at my hand and going, what am I going to do with this? And the opponent's playing Kato, and I'm playing out my supports, and he opens with 3 10th Company Scouts. And I look at my cards in despair, and then I realize that one of those events I'm ignoring is Daka Daka Daka.
Sure. Just you're so used to seeing it purely for its printed shield icons.
Yeah, and so I was able to kill all 3 of the scouts with that, and after the first turn, dominate him on command. And he wasn't able to really recover from losing 3 units in the first turn.
Well, it's definitely a fantastic opportunity there where you turned, what just seemed like a completely miserable situation suddenly around, so it just really underlines the fact for me that players should be absolutely aware of exactly what their deck can do. So, if you're used to running a card with one specific use in mind, like in creating my review videos and things like that, I try to touch on as many ridiculous corner case and situational uses as possible, just because the more information, the more knowledge and experience you've got going into a game, probably the better off you're gonna be. So,
I think the other thing I would say about fighting with Zogwort, never fight a land war on Iredale.
Right.
Unless you have an overwhelming advantage, if you fight Zogwort at Iredale and he's not bloody, even if you win the battle, you will lose the war. You're going to have so many of your units taken out by Snotlings because you can afford to get as much damage as you want on Zogwort as long as he doesn't get bloodied.
Right.
And then take it all off after the battle.
Right. You can, just like you were mentioning earlier, you can make that battle last as long as orkishly possible. I suppose something I was kind of curious about is you happen to also mention using the signature attachment, the Weird Boy stick, earlier for its shield value, just to make sure that you can keep Old Zogwort in combat as long as you can. How often is it that you end up using it for its, conventional attachment effect, as opposed to just a 3 shield card?
The card itself doesn't look like much. It's very subtle, but it is a very powerful attachment, and the 0 cost is a nice deploy stall. If I start with it or draw it on the first turn, unless I'm going against a what's clearly a assassination-specific build,
Right.
I'll almost always play it. If I draw it late in the game, it depends on the board situation. If my Warlord is bloodied, or I need to block a critical attack that I can see coming, I'm going to hold it out. Early in the game, though, by playing the Weird Boy stick, you can carry 1 Snotling across turns.
Right.
And there have been a couple of occasions where I've won a planet because my opponent underestimated just how much it would take to kill 1 Snotling. I had one situation where there were 3 Heretic Inventors sitting on the same planet with 2 damage on all of them from, I think, some Nurglings, and Tox Prime had hit them a couple times.
Sure.
And I had 1 Snotling there with initiative and won the planet because they had to kill it 3 times.
Well, that's pretty ridiculous, I suppose, to say the least.
Yeah, you look at that board state and you're like, well, I got 3 guys, he's got a Snotling, I'm good. But Snotling swings first, kills one of them. One of them swings back, kills the Snotling, and then you make a new ready Snotling and kill the 3rd one.
Well, I suppose apart from that, Paragon Snotlings token, are there any other experiences that really stand out in your memory where Old Zogwart's really flexed his aged muscles and kind of demonstrated just how powerful he can possibly be?
I had a great opportunity today testing out a new deck using Chaos, where I sent a Runt Hunter to the first planet and won. I had sent Zogwort to the second planet, which was Planium, and I moved the Runt Hunter opposite my opponent's Warlord. They were playing Strachan.
Right.
And so it was Strachan versus a Runt Herder, and he felt confident that he could defeat a single Runt Herder. But I had a handful of shields. And so he swings, I shield 1, I've got a Snotling, and we're fighting in a Tox Prime. Or a Trox, I think I'm saying it wrong. But
Either way.
Yeah, so now he's got 2 damage on him, and he elects to stay. So he swings at my Runt Herder again. I've got another 1 shield. So now I've got 2 Snots and a Runt Herder for 3 more damage. I swing with the first 2, he takes it all, he hasn't shielded yet. So he's got 2 HP left. And I've got my Launch the Snots in hand. I swing for 3, he's got a 2 shield. But even if he shields and then runs away, he'll still get bloodied from the planet trigger.
Right.
So I was able to bloody him on the first turn with a single Runt Herder and 2 shields.
Well, very well done. I suppose, just how often is it that you do manage to get, huge value out of those Runt Herders?
With my traditional build, it's very rare. I think if you go with the heavy Orc build with custom field generators, you can get a lot more value out of them.
I could certainly see
Or
that.
if you're doing the Chaos build, because you'll have more shields access and the opportunity to ping them with Ork cannons potentially, or warp storms or other effects.
Right.
The disadvantage of relying on your Runhunters, I think, is the same for any deck. You have vulnerability to effects that target powerful units, Archon's Terror or Klavix War Leader. By investing in hostile environment gear to make your Runhunter bigger, you're making it a target too.
I definitely have to agree with you there. It's a little bit tragic that our meta, at the moment punishes either attachment-heavy units or just high hit point elite units just so much, in that there's so many different card effects. Like the sheer number of counters for high-value units like that is absolutely astounding. So I remain as curious as ever to see if and when that ends up changing, but I feel definitely we're kind of closed off or discouraged in a competitive context from really getting to use a lot of potentially fun and powerful effects like that, just because it's not practical. But I suppose just all in all, any other advice you have for players either attempting to run or run up against old Zogwort? Anything else you feel is worth sharing while I've got you on the line here?
I think if you're playing either against him or with him, you want to have a appreciation of what he can do with Battlecry and Launch the Snots at all times. And if you're playing him, you want to try to draw your opponent into overcommit against forces that look inferior. That's how you get the best value out of it. Because you're paying 3 for the event. You need to defeat significantly more powerful forces for it to be worth doing.
Sure, you've got to derive the utmost value.
And if you're playing against him, make sure that you don't overcommit into a bunch of weak units if your opponent has a lot of resources.
Well, makes sense to me. I suppose any final tips or suggestions for how to get the absolute most maximum value out of some of the Ork cards, just because so many people see it as being a weak faction, but just any additional expertise to share with how to make Zogwort maybe more viable or competitive.
I love playing him. I feel like he's honestly very slightly behind Ragnar if you're building a hyper-aggressive deck. But he has some advantages that Ragnar doesn't. I think he's a really fun warlord, but I understand the people that would disparage him too. I don't know. I want him to be tier 1, but I'm not sure he's quite there.
Well, I suppose what do you think is holding him back?
The problem that he has is that his signature squad, to get good value out of it, you have to adopt a playstyle that's vulnerable to all the anti-big unit abilities and cards that are in.
Right.
If you go with the hyper-aggressive build, you don't get a good value out of a signature squad. But you have the advantage against the meta where my traditional build of the deck, Klavix War Leader, almost never kills anything because there are no targets that survive hits that are worth paying for to kill.
Sure. It almost sounds like he's, in a sense, born between two worlds, with lending himself well to the hyper-aggressive meta we kind of find ourselves in, but at the same time, his signature squad is built in a way that it's kind of ill-suited to stand up against a lot of the common competition out there.
I think so. Just you don't. He's built for the long game, and orcs in general want to play these big units, and then big units are discouraged right now. And I've had a lot of success playing him with small units, and I really enjoy doing that. I think he's a lot more fun to play than Ragnar or Kith or Eldorath. But maybe very slightly disadvantaged compared to playing a similar build with Ragnar.
Well, I suppose anything else you'd like to get out there while, before we bring this video to a close? Any final closing thoughts or bits of advice for anyone watching?
I was reading a tournament report on the Card Game DB forums today, I think. It was today. Someone had a disastrous first round, and their opponent had conceded in the second round. And I think that I would say that, it's possible, especially if you built your deck with some comeback cards, to turn that kind of position around. And I think it's just something that, go down fighting. It might be hard to reverse a terrible first turn, but even if you choose to fight with the Orks at Iredale and realize too late that you managed to kill 3 Snotlings and get yourself bloodied on the first turn, be careful with your Bloody Warlord now and see if you can turn the fight around. Don't give up on the second turn.
Sure. I mean, you might as well play it out and, at the very least, make it into a learning experience. Certainly figuring out how to recover and play an uphill battle is going to do you a lot more good, I think, in a tournament than just, crushing victory after crushing victory.
I agree on that 100%. The games that I learned the most from at the regionals were the ones against the 5th player who beat me. Both games I lost were the same player. The first time I had him at bloodied at 1 HP, but wasn't able to seal the deal.
Right. Well, I suppose you've walked away from it a better player than ever, so anything else you'd like to toss out there before we bring things to a close?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, then I'll just end things by thanking you very much for your time, and if any of our viewers would want to get in touch with you, maybe ask you for advice or try to benefit from your Zogwort and Orc experience, how might they attempt to get a hold of you?
The easiest way to get in touch with me is probably to message me on the Card Game DB forums. My username on there is Blackliner. That's actually from the Battletech CCG. It only lasted for a couple of years. It was a unit in the game that I thought was fantastic. And I've used it as a username ever since.
Very fitting. And I'll be sure to include a link to your page for messaging purposes in the description of this video, but once again, thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate you coming on to represent poor old Zogwort, so thank you, sir, and take care.
He's definitely... I think the thing that I would say helps the most with him is that people underestimate him.
Sure.
And that's lets you set up the overcommits that you need to put them into a losing board state.
Right. Well, I mean, you might as well take advantage of some arrogance if the opportunity presents itself.
People should not forget that Orcs are made to fight and win.
That's true. So, thank you very much, and have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Well, with our interview having drawn to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching. Be sure to leave a comment sharing your own thoughts, opinion, perspective, and gaming experience when it comes to playing Old Zogwort and the Orcs faction as a whole. Interaction with viewers, such as yourself, is the absolute highlight of my creating and maintaining content for this channel, so please take a moment to let me know what you thought of this interview in particular and which warlord you'd like to see next. Plus, if it just so happens that you know someone that might make a good candidate for a future interview, please feel free to share. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. Feel free to contact me directly and keep in touch through any social media outlet you'd like. But in any case, thank you once again for watching, and be sure to check check back again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.